Hey there, I know it can be intimidating to launch into a new show that already has a huge fan base, so I'm going to talk about a few important things that you should know before watching Star Trek The Next Generation. And just to be clear, you should watch it at the time of recording. It's on Netflix, it's right there, and it is genuinely a very good show, and I think it appeals to lots of different people with very different tastes. Okay, let's go. Number 1, the first season is pretty trashy. Like a lot of TV shows, TNG wasn't just immediately great. It took time for the team to find the show's identity and start cranking out really high quality episodes. Now, there is still some really valuable setup in the first season of the show, and even though TNG isn't based around one grand continuing narrative, which we'll talk about soon, I do think it's worth getting that information up front. But overall, season 1 is pretty ugly, low budget, and genuinely feels dated, but those are also the reasons I enjoy going back to season 1 a lot. It's definitely a different tone from what the show would become later on, but I like seeing the awful effects and watching the cast and the writers refine each of the major characters. Number 2, this is some clever sci-fi writing. For decades now, sci-fi has been a breeding ground for some compelling stories and ideas, and I feel that TNG lives up to that reputation most of the time. Almost every single episode has a very clear central dilemma that the characters need to work through. Sometimes it's a space problem or a malfunction with the ship, and quite often it's an ethical question that resonates strongly in the real world. If you like abstract problem solving and critical thinking, this show is going to be a real treat for you. Number 3, don't worry about the Technobabble. TNG is famous for having lots of what the cast called Technobabble.
The Enterprise computer system is controlled cross-linked with a redundant Melicord 14 kiloquad interface L nanoprocalolaterals, very Heisenfram terminal,
where they talk about science and tech, some of which is based on real science and tech. In fact, the writing staff reportedly referenced data from NASA to ensure accuracy. I don't know if that's true, but there's also some made-up stuff because it's science fiction. Either way, don't concern yourself with trying to follow all these technical details. It will always be clear how these details are relevant to the plot, and that's all you need to know. Number 4, Patrick Stewart is a gift. Yeah, I know that this gets talked about a lot, but Patrick Stewart is a wonderful performer, and TNG benefits massively from his skill. It's very rare to see him not giving his all in an episode, or at the very least, he stays believable, which is important in a show that regularly makes statements about the inherent value of life and concerns around disabilities and parental custody and spiritual belief and law. It just wouldn't have been the same show without this guy, and it's worth appreciating his efforts in every episode. Number 5, skip around all you want. Go for it. TV today, and especially sci-fi television today, pretty consistently goes after a continuous narrative. Each episode picks up from the last one, more or less, and you need to follow along closely to understand what's happening. But back in the 80s and 90s, Star Trek was allowed to have kind of a sitcom format, where there are only a few continuing story threads, and each episode basically stands on its own. So skip around the show all you want. If you want to do a full watch through later on, that's fine, but just enjoy it. If you only want to see the light and fluffy episodes, go for it, because there are indeed some really heavy hitters in the mix that touch on very serious subject matter, but it's there if you want it, but it's also not a requirement. That said, there are some beefy storylines surrounding the Klingon Empire, the Romulans, and the Borg, so if you want to know what's happening there, don't skip those episodes. Most famously, The Best of Both Worlds, parts 1 and 2, are really important to the series, and they're also just very good. That's all I've got for now. If you start watching the show, please tell me what you think of it, and if you know more about TNG than I do, feel free to yell at me. Thanks for stopping by.